and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and the people and events that happen in our state that build our communities and let us know more about each other. Let us become more tolerant and find a diverse life here in Rhode Island, which is good for our whole family. Thank you for watching. Today we have people here who have been around the world and back, so to speak. People who have worked hard in anthropology, in archaeology, in diplomatic circles to try to help all of us to understand the Arab world differently. Richard Lobban and Carolyn Furr-Lobban are here to talk to us about some of their learnings as they have worked around the world, particularly in Africa, particularly now in the Sudan and Tunisia, Egypt. And there's so many things that we need to learn that we don't understand because we're hearing misinformation or partial information. And maybe we need to look at some of these many books that they've written on the subjects. Richard and Caroline, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
We are so excited to talk to you. I know we're going to want to have 3 shows rather than 1, but for right now we're going to have just 1. You are both cultural anthropologists.
Correct.
And maybe we need to unpack that a little bit and say what you do and what you've been doing for 40 years.
Well, we are both anthropologists, which is the study of everything. And I think part of what has kept our conversation going for nearly 50 years and the joy that we have in educating, in education and in travel, learning from travel, is guided by anthropology, which is the study of humanity, all of humanity, throughout all of time and space. So that means
that's pretty inclusive.
And so you spend a lifetime, you could spend several lifetimes and still never master. So we're in the field called cultural anthropology, which is probably the largest number of anthropologists in America, but it also includes physical anthropology or human evolution, the study of languages, linguistic diversity, the thousands of languages that currently exist and that existed in the past, and archaeology, which of course is the study of the physical remains of past societies.
It's also language, isn't it? A lot of times, yes.
Yes,
And
it's
certainly
languages,
culture.
as I mentioned.
Anthropology conventionally is divided into 4 fields: linguistics, archaeology, physical anthropology, human evolution, and cultural anthropology.
Well, I have to say, it's something that is the foundation for all of us, and yet most of us sort of left that in college and now need to learn again, don't we? Because there's so many new things being found. Richard, you've led tours to the Sudan and Egypt for 40 years, and you taught at Rhode Island College, and now are teaching at the Naval War College.
Right.
And you're talking to them at the Naval War College about Arab issues, Arab studies.
Clearly, the Arab world and Africa is very important from the cultural, historical point of view and from the security point of view. Some of our threats that we face from a political or military point of view are founded in Africa, in Egypt, in Libya, Nigeria, Somalia, and Sudan. So we're pretty highly engaged in understanding with much more clarity what those issues are.
And Caroline, here in this country, or in Rhode Island, you lead something called the World Affairs Council, and hopefully you're bringing some of the knowledge from around the world into the living rooms of Rhode Island people.
That is the idea. The World Affairs Council of Rhode Island is one of over 90 World Affairs Councils nationally. And we also, besides the basic mission of education about foreign affairs for the public, it's basically a function of educating the public about foreign affairs, we also engage in international visitors. So we have had so much fun with international visitors. Recently a group of Mongolian peacekeepers who experienced the Atlantic Ocean for the first time, coming from the Gobi Desert. And next week, actually, I have a group of 5 young women entrepreneurs from Russia coming to Rhode Island. Their only stay is going to be in Rhode Island. They'll be staying with families for 10 days and basically going around and meeting local entrepreneurs and speaking about how we can improve economic relations between Russia and the United States with a focus on the state of Rhode Island.
But it's individuals who are going to do that more
It's
than our
individuals.
leaders. Yes.
Well, we call it citizen diplomacy, which is face-to-face, one handshake at a time, one conversation at a time. And one of the things that will be beautiful about this program is that these young women will be staying with Rhode Island families and having that kind of immersion experience, which, lasts a lifetime, frankly.
Yes.
We had also a Lebanese security delegation. We took them to the Providence Journal and to the War College, and we had Chinese social scientists. So our horizons are definitely broader. And when you mention our interests stretch around the world, that both of us have sailed in the semester at sea, literally around the world, teaching for 4 months.
Twice, northern and southern
Well,
voyages.
I don't know. Somehow we need to sit down for about 3 days and talk. But Richard, I want to start with something that you told me about, and that is that you have found a new temple, or the altar of a new temple in the Sudan. And maybe we could get a map picture of where the Sudan is, so that we can sort of hone in on where you've been and what's happening.
Well, in this particular project, I'm working with a team from Russia and from Italy, and then our own Americans who come to excavate as well. We've been in the eastern Sudan between the Nile, fairly close to the Nile, but between the Nile and the Red Sea, in the eastern desert called the Butana Desert. And we did find 8 years ago some potsherds like the one in my hand, knowing that they would be from this particular time period. We also found iron slag, pieces of iron that were produced locally, major center for iron production 2,000 years ago. So when we started to excavate this particular site under official Sudanese excavation license, we were confident that we would find something. But what we found is parts of a temple. We found inscribed columns and lintels over doors and so forth that had been recycled in Christian times, about 1000 AD. And so we just kept looking and looking. And this past year, we found in the original location, painted walls. We found steps into the temple with paint of feet as if they were going inside. And then the most spectacular was to find about 5-foot tall altar stone, heavily inscribed in hieroglyphics, even though we're not in Egypt whatsoever, and the goddess Isis, not to be confused with the terrorist group ISIS. And immediately that was removed to the Khartoum Museum to have it maximum security.
So what you're saying is that you found something in the Sudan that's from Egypt, or that's using Egyptian writing, Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so immediately you learned something, didn't you?
Yeah, for sure.
And this altar is
40 centimeters square and 140 centimeters tall. Of course, we're not in Egypt, and the irony is that some people have the misconception that Africa has no history. Well, it's the birthplace of humanity, monumental works of writing, of agriculture, and so many superlatives, always in the most extreme, most ancient. But ironically, at the time this temple was built, Egypt was no longer under Egyptian control. It was under first Persian control twice, and then Greek control, then Roman control, then finally Arab control. So the irony is that in Sudan, Egyptian culture, language, basic religion was preserved when it had already been overthrown in Egypt
itself.
Yeah. There are more pyramids in Sudan, actually, even than Egypt, although they're smaller and later.
Now, people have walked in this area before, so what did you have to do? You obviously knew there was something there. Did you use some kind of Geiger counter, or what did you use to try to find?
We saw a surface scatter of potsherds, of broken pottery, and the type of pots were typical of either Christian times, around 800 or so AD, to Meroitic times, which go back to 4th century BC. And so we knew that this had been occupied at an earlier time. So the one of the first steps, besides locating the site, getting permission to excavate there, was to use ground-penetrating radar to look for deformations under the ground. So the first time I excavated anything, we hit a wall because we knew there was something there. Of course, we didn't know the nature, function. That turns out to be a kitchen area and a storage area. Later on, another site, part of the site, was more rehabilitated Meroitic. This site is called of the Meroitic times. And then now in the third main structure on the site, we found the temple.
It's just absolutely amazing what happens because we have technology now, isn't it? I mean, first of all, you know that things are there, you know how deep they are, you know how large they are. It's just amazing that you can take something like this out into the desert.
The other thing to say about this site and the Sudan in general is that the old interpretations where this was sort of like the little brown brother of Egypt and a little bit, you know, a minor reflection of Egyptian antiquity, when in fact this is a separate civilization, even was competitive with the pharaonic Egypt at certain points, with its own distinctive language, and so really is a unique ancient African state that's quite separate from Egypt. So that interpretation, which Richard has helped to reinterpret from the old days, actually some of the things which are found at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, that original archaeology thought of Sudan as just a minor reflection of Egypt, when in fact it's its own separate civilizational complex.
Well, in fact, 3 of the pharaohs who were Nubian or Sudanese actually have their names in the Bible, so that's a pretty nice accomplishment. And they ruled all of Egypt as well as Sudan in the 25th dynasty. So many important, and they have their own language, written language, which has still not been deciphered. So that's another treasure. As a linguist, also working on trying to decipher many texts which are not known.
And since we know the public is fascinated by archaeology, Richard didn't mention one of the more interesting finds too, not as important as the altar. He found a severed head in the corner of the temple, which it clearly was disarticulated from its body.
Yep.
And the question is, who is this and why, and what's the interpretation of this
Was
assassination?
It a war?
Most likely an invasion and the occupation of Sudan.
It was
by
an
Ethiopia.
invasion by Christians from Ethiopia in the 4th century AD, and they destroyed the temple. So now we're talking about Muslim extremists or motivated by religion, just beheading people. In this case, it was Christian who conquered this ancient civilization of Sudan.
You are both fluent in Arabic,
We do our
and so then you look at culture from the point of view of modern language, but you're also looking at ancient sculptures and architecture.
Well, we both learned Arabic to use in the field, because if you're going to be an anthropologist and you want to study people and you want to live with people, you need to speak their language. So over the years, we have become quite fluent, and some of my books have been translated into Arabic. One is under translation right now. So there's it's not a one-way conversation. It's a conversation with people, and they, responding to your work. And so to keep those lines of communication, what should we say, bilateral, trilateral communication, especially in this day and age, when we can do that, and it's not us looking down and studying people, but we like to study from the ground up what's happening on the ground, what are people's ideas and beliefs, and engage in a conversation that is really more of a dialogue over time and over space and time.
One of the most important applications of our Arabic language is working with political asylum cases, people who've suffered from discrimination or most commonly torture. And so we have to interview them in Arabic to ascertain that they belong to protective groups and are eligible for protection. I have now 8 cases from Darfur in England that I had to interview them in Arabic and then determine which particular group they belong to. So the anthropological training has now had an application that we never exactly imagined, but literally it's saving their lives.
To give you an anecdote, because it just takes a minute, a family that we stayed with in Shendi, which is near to the archaeological site, the father was a lawyer, and one day he just said to me in passing, can I come to America? And I said, well, sure, anybody is welcome, knowing it's not easy. But literally, about a year later, he showed up at the door, having come all the way from Sudan via Cairo to New York and then Rhode Island to say, I want asylum, and you're the person who will be able to help me. Not knowing very much Arabic, we sat down, and over a week I took his statement as to what had happened to him. He had been arrested, he had been tortured, he was imprisoned repeatedly. Finally, they took his license to practice law away, which meant that he couldn't, support his family. And so that was the straw that broke the camel's back, literally. And then he came to the U.S., he acquired asylum, and now he's brought his family, and they're living out in Minneapolis. The kids are in American higher education, and so this family has literally been transformed because of a casual conversation with a family member that where we were staying at the archaeological site.
There are many misunderstandings that we have with the Arab world right
Absolutely.
now, and simplifications and stereotypes.
Right.
10 things that you know about the Arab world that you would like other people to know, and maybe we won't get to all 10, but what are the things that really are your passion that you feel the rest of us should know about the Arab world?
The list of 10 should be 1,000, actually, because
Yes.
but the fundamentals of Arab and African history, which is vast. First of all, people think somehow it's something that just happened and so forth. The grievances which they have.
It's vast because it's so deep, right?
Yeah, well, and the grievances which they have with the West, we have grievances also with the East. So we need to understand, things from their point of view, not to justify them, but to understand them. Understanding is quite different than apologizing for them. There are things about the Middle East which need to be modified and changed, and indeed the forefront of the movement for freedom and democracy against dictatorships has been led by Arab people in the streets. But we have to figure out a policy which will empower them to have their full expression of human rights, but without intervening. I think it's widely agreed that the intervention in Iraq was misguided and has precipitated many of the grave security problems which we are now facing without adequate solutions. So the cost of not understanding is extremely high. And of course we have resistance about political and domestic issues, about refugees, even though we may have been the principal source for causing them in the first place.
All right, so what else would you like people to know? This is really important discussion, I think, that's foundational to our culture today.
If we just can accept that we are all human beings and that we all share the same fundamental desires for ourselves and for our families. One of the things which is frequently misunderstood is the fact that the Arab and Muslim family tends to be, it's the strongest unit, and it's everything. And so decisions are made not on individual basis, what's going to advance me, but what is going to advance, the family. So the extended family can be hundreds of people to whom you gain strength and you give back. You share. If you've gotten an education, you've come to America, you've gotten a good job, it is your responsibility to help out other family members. So the strength of the family is primary. I'm frequently asked about women. Isn't it the worst case scenario, for any place on earth? Well, no, it isn't. And when you live with people and you study, as I have in Islamic law, what rights women have, they have tremendous rights, and they had rights in the law that preceded those that, we developed in the West. So instead of looking down and saying those poor women, they're suffering, it's to ask, what can we learn from each other? How can we share in a dialogue that can advance the overall cause of humanity, whether it is, in the birth control and reproductive rights, but also the rights in the law, the rights to to marry with full consent, to divorce. Divorce is very available and very accessible. To work and to drive. Well, see, the Saudi case comes up all the time. That is one country and the most conservative Arab and Muslim country that there is Saudi Arabia. Throughout the Arab and Muslim world, women are driving. They're becoming heads of state. There are more women who have been heads of state in the Muslim world, and we're thinking about maybe the first time right now. So Indonesia has had heads of state. You know, other Muslim
the biggest takeaway of all is that the Muslim world, not to mention the Arab world, which is just a small part of the Muslim world, is extremely complex. And it's a graveyard of prophecies and a graveyard of generalizations. It's, you know, first of all, most Muslims don't live in the Arab world at all. They live in Indonesia. The greatest number of Muslims in Africa is not Egypt, but Nigeria. And if you're going to go and bomb Arabs and you're going to do it in Iran, you will not hit any because they are Persians, not Arabs. So, I mean, some fundamental facts about miscommunication and misunderstanding need to be, you know, cleared away at the outset. I mean, we just can't understand that African countries, Arab countries, are mostly coming from a colonial past, and colonialism, we think, oh, that was wonderful. Except for the Arab and African point of view, it was military, you know, dictatorship. And so when they transition to post-colonial governments and they have military dictatorships, guess where they learned it from? England and France. And so we have, but we don't want to follow the Arab saying where you point your finger at someone, you have three pointing back at yourself. So this is a big problem.
One of the most important things that's happened recently in Rhode Island, of course, we have half a dozen mosques in Rhode Island. We have an indigenous Muslim population and many people who have come from outside the United States. But the Islamic Center of Rhode Island, which is right down, you know, near Central High School, opened its doors during the holidays for people to come and meet a Muslim, you know, have a conversation. We were there. There were hundreds of people who had come in just to say, well, what does a mosque look like? What are Muslims like? Can we, you know, dialogue with one another? We were recognized as friends of the Muslim community, but what that means is that we've taken the time to become knowledgeable and to be open-minded and not to be apologetic for all the things that go wrong in the Muslim world or among Arabs, any more than I would apologize for what's going on in our own country. Next time we go to Sudan, people are going to say, what is it about this guy Trump? And, you know, saying that, you know, Muslims should be banned from the United States until we sort everything out. That level of ignorance, which, of course, plays right into the hands of our enemies, shall we say, it takes a good bit of time to explain. So there are many things about our culture that people find reprehensible. And, you know, that pointing the finger is just such a great image, because as soon as you do that, you say, well, look inward. Look at your own society before you judge another.
Well, maybe since we are running short of time, the story that kind of captures this is somebody who wants to build a wall. Whether Mr. Trump once saw a carpenter going by with his load of wood, and he said, "Would you come and build a wall because I can't get along with my neighbors?" And the carpenter said, "No problem. I will have your problem solved very quickly. Just come back in a few days." And when he came back, instead of building a wall, he built a bridge. And the bridge is the cultural bridge, understanding bridge is the biggest takeaway that we can offer to the viewers and to capture the spirit. You know, not apologizing for people left or right or here or there, but trying to make more bridges, more communication, because that's where we're going to make the world a better place.
And you've tried to do that with your books, and you've tried to do that at the War College because you're helping them to understand security issues and identity issues and culture issues, cultural issues.
And the high cost of making mistakes.
I also teach at the War College. I'm teaching a course online now called Religion, Politics, and Society in Africa. And these are, you know, mid-career officers, people in the State Department who really want to engage in a way that the kind of knowledge that we have can be used practically on the ground. So I'll tell you a story if we have the time. One of my former students, who happened to be a Guatemalan immigrant, but joined the armed services in order to achieve some upward mobility, he was deployed the first days of the Iraq War in Baghdad. And he said his whole group was there before dawn. They heard the call to prayer. Allahu Akbar, come to prayer, come to prayer. And they thought it was a war cry. They all got fixed at their, they were ready to shoot. And so I was just teaching about this, Islamic Societies in Practice. That was the book I was using. And I saw the student shaking his head and just, hitting himself. He said, we could have killed people. We didn't know that we were hearing the call to prayer. That wouldn't happen now. But that was the level of ignorance, the most basic. It would be like saying you see a crucifix, and it means you're ready to go into battle.
What would you say to people now, reading your books, listening? Where do people go now to get true information so that we can welcome people? Yesterday there was a little bit of a meeting with the governor to talk about how we welcome. And what do you think we should be doing?
The best thing is, like for Thanksgiving, invite somebody to your house for Thanksgiving. Invite your relatives and neighbors and so forth, but invite people who are different from you. And then ask them that you would like to go to their house and learn more about their culture, their values, their religion, their background. I'm all for mutual understanding. It doesn't mean accepting somebody else's views that are different from yours, but it does mean to try to understand things from their perspective. That's the key for making advance in hostile relations, confused relations, wrong-headed relations. And as we have seen with invasion of Iraq, 2003, this was extremely costly in blood and treasure on the Iraqi side first and foremost, but on our side as well, because now the U.S. is digging its way out of a hole. So we get people who are so misinformed that they're attracted to, very xenophobic ideas. When indeed, for addressing the issues, we need allies, not more enemies. And the idea is that walls will make friends or will make us safe is absurd, actually.
You're talking about individual to individual.
Absolutely.
And it really makes a lot of sense to me. And it makes the discrepancies, the gaps, the chasms seem a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Right.
If there's a half a minute,
there is literally a half a minute.
Many of our convenience stores are operated by Arabs and Muslims, and many of them are refugees from Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. You just go in and you are that's an Arab-looking person. Say Salamu Alaikum, peace be on you. And the response is, wa alaikum assalam, and upon you, peace. That's a collective greeting. Peace be upon you and everyone you care about, and upon you and everyone you care about. You can write it on the, Salamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. It's a universal greeting. It opens every door, and it means it's a fundamental greeting of peace and love and working together.
What can I say to that? It's absolutely true. I hope that there is peace and that you're giving peace to others right in your neighborhood. Thank you for watching.